All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 19th, 2022 Agriculture Advisory Board meeting. Calling to order everyone here. Thank you, Kevin, everyone, for joining us here today. We have a pretty comprehensive and wide-ranging agenda here today. So I appreciate everyone staying on topic because I know there's a lot of people here from different organizations and programs like from the health unit, Bill Cridland and whatnot, Zvi from ECDEV, Mr. Adam Biddle as well. So if we can just keep this meeting rolling forward, it would be greatly appreciated. So calling to order this meeting, if I could get an approval of the agenda sent out by Mr. Kevin.
So moved.
Thank you, Trish. Can I get a seconder? Counselor, thank you kindly. Any opposed? Perfect. Thank you. Any reason why everyone shouldn't be here? Beautiful. Sounds good. All right. Moving into item 4, presentations. Thank you, Dr. Strauss, for joining us here today for a verbal update for the health unit from the farm regulations update. Just as a heads up, I do know that, well, I have a couple questions that maybe you're going to answer right away, especially with the incoming men and women that I have been receiving from farmers, but I'll let you go and it might resolve all of that. So thank you, sir, and thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Chair Zamenek. So it's my pleasure to speak with the board today, through you, of course. I don't have any major announcements, and I hope I'm able to answer those questions that you have for me. As we discussed at the last Agricultural Advisory Board meeting, it certainly is my impression that the provincial and federal ministries, the relevant ministries, are taking a more active role and making more homogenous rules across the province and the country. And so there has been less of a need for the local public health unit to make specific regulations. And so we've stepped back from that, and I'm sure all of the relevant parties will receive their updates and the rescission of the Section 22 order, which we've stepped back on to avoid contradicting regulations.
Sounds good. I got to jump on a conference.
Oh, I think there's some. In any case, so that's our posture in general at the public health unit. I think the other update to say is that the pandemic has changed a lot even since we last spoke. So the current Omicron variant is 8 times more transmissible than past variants. And so that's not great news. And we can imagine on this basis, in terms of just being realistic, that efforts to contain the spread of Omicron will be roughly 8 times less successful than efforts to contain the spread of original SARS-CoV-2. There's some silver linings, though. One is that Omicron seems to be more than 50% less likely to cause severe outcomes like hospitalization and death. So that's still not great news, because if you're like, well, it's 8 times more transmissible, 50% of 8 is 4 times, so are we talking about 4 times as many hospitalizations? And then, but there's some other major differences today. This time last year, nobody was vaccinated. This time this year, about 90% of adults have had at least one vaccination, and that seems to be about the proportion in migrant farm workers as well. And the vaccination remains 95% protective against hospitalization or death. So if you do all the back of the napkin sort of calculations, I think you're looking at less than 1/10 as many hospitalizations perhaps than would have been experienced last time around. We still don't want all those hospitalizations to occur at once, and this wave is going to move through quickly. So there are still those regulations federally and provincially to try to flatten this curve so it doesn't all happen at once, but it is going to happen quickly. And it does seem to be the case that Omicron provides natural immunity to those who have recovered just as much as previous variants did. So I think, it's bad news that it spread so much more quickly, but we have vaccines. It is a milder variant. It's going to go up quickly. It's going to come down quickly. And then I think it's going to be over. And the other thing to mention is, and there are now better treatments. So just yesterday, Health Canada approved this Paxlovid. And we have access to monoclonals nearby at St. Joseph's Hospital in Hamilton. I will make you aware that I am expecting some updated regulations to come from the province. I've seen a draft version. I'm not at liberty to announce what they show, but I think I can say sorry, and they're not regulations; they are guidance, and I'm usually careful to draw that distinction. The guidance that is coming out, I think, is smart. I think it's intended to make sure that temporary foreign workers have proper access to healthcare so that they can look at getting things like the new medicine and the monoclonal antibodies. And I don't expect them to materially impair your operations in general. But I can't give more specific on that draft document. I can't give more specifics on that draft document from the ministry at this time. So that's my update, and I'm really happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, well, that's great news. The transmission is, of course, something that, what we're hearing in the news and, being reaffirmed by you as well. With the one, I think, concern that farmers have been calling me that that they're looking for some guidance as well is with the arrivals incoming soon. I believe there's a Trinidad flight coming in on the 8th of February. So there will be an influx here starting soon. The one problem that farmers are experiencing right now, we're looking for a little bit of guidance on, is one, the government has yet to, and I know OFVGA, Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Grower Association, are working on trying to get the federal government to come down and say yay or nay on mandatory vaccines for temporary foreign workers. One of the situations and scenarios that will be happening this year, especially in the near future, will be when there's are unnamed workers. So if a farm is, hiring people that they are unaware of, I think I'm looking for 20 individuals. Farmers are not given the vaccine status of that, and nor do we even know the name of that individual until pretty much they get to Pearson. So how is the transportation going to be? Is there any differentiating between a vaccinated and an unvaccinated person on a bus? Secondly, if I can lead that up for that potential situation, is with the random COVID testing that's occurring on international or anyone crossing into our borders. Those people that are randomly tested at the border have to self-isolate until their test result comes back. How does that look like if a tested person is on a bus with people who didn't test? And does a bus constitute self-isolation if they're wearing their masks and there's airflow with the windows? Or do farmers need to have separate transportation in the event that the people coming in, that one of the, say, 100 gets tested? Does that person need to self-isolate in a different vehicle?
So as to the first question, or before I answer the first question, let me just say on background, we at the Public Health Unit considered a local mandatory vaccination policy. It seemed to me that it would be extraordinarily cumbersome to operationalize because of this issue of unnamed workers. So if somebody's showing up at Pearson, who's going to look at their vaccine certificate? Who necessarily is even going to be able to interpret their vaccine certificate and say you had this vaccine and this vaccine, does that count under Canadian regulations? And sending people on flights back just seemed, and putting the onus on farmers to decide whether they have to send people on flights back and organizing those flights just seemed like really not a fair thing to ask farmers to do. So it seemed to me pretty clear that the onus for who should be allowed into the country and their vaccination status, that really is something for the federal government to decide. And ideally, it should happen in the home country, that somebody should be looking at their vaccination status before they get on a plane. So I will leave to the federal government the things that are rightly the purview of the federal government. And I'm not going to opine on what the federal government should or should not do. I'm going to work with whatever they decide. So, and now I remember that I wanted to give that background. Your first question, though, was on transportation?
Transportation, yeah. Correct.
So I think that the Red Farm booklet kind of regulation document that we sent out spoke to this, and I don't want to contradict it. Maybe it doesn't, but can I don't want to say something and realize that I'm contradicting my own regulation, because I can't. But I thought dispensation was made for this sort of situation.
Okay.
It's probably better if we do this by email, like these kind of like particular regulatory questions, right? I just don't want to be giving conflicting information or to say something that is not how my team understands it. So maybe better we do that in writing post meeting. Similarly with the quarantine issue, I think you're because I think that was kind of also a transportation question.
Yeah. And because what if, so in the event of, I think leading up to the final thing that might be the most possible case situation would be, is a few farmers reached out, if we send a bus up to go collect and get everybody from Toronto. If there's a positive case on that bus with the, the transmission rate of Omicron, what is considered a close contact on that bus of people? Is the entire bus considered close contacts, or is it row of front, row behind, and people in the row of the bus?
I can answer that question in general, which is that close contact is, in general, a little bit of an ad hoc decision. So are the windows open? Are the masks on? These are all things that go into that decision, and largely on a case by case. But in general, to me, if you're sitting on a row by yourself with a mask on and the windows are open, no, I wouldn't consider that a close contact. Okay. But it gets really tricky because because it's special rules if there's an outbreak versus if there's not an outbreak, and in general, cases are not managed by the public health unit anymore outside of the highest risk setting, but farms or congregate living settings are a high risk setting, so we would be managing, so we would be giving advice on a case to case basis. But in any case, like, I acknowledge that the rules tend to be a bit convoluted, and that's why I don't love giving answers kind of shooting from the hip like this. But yeah, but no, so the answer is twofold though. A, it's a little bit ad hoc, like every particular situation is different. If the public health unit is involved, the public health professional will provide tailored advice for that particular context. But no, in general, if you're masked and 2 meters away from everyone else and there's good ventilation, then I wouldn't consider it a close contact situation. Okay.
No, thank you. That was like realistically, that scenario in situation 3 was the one I've been receiving the most correspondence on, is to what does that look like for preparation of, do we go ahead and have a few hotel rooms booked, because what happened last year, how do we prepare preemptively? Because I think that's how, we're all, on the farm ag side, being preemptively ready in the event of, so that we can manage it as quickly as possible. So I appreciate your answer, and I understand that it is case by case, but I understand and appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Good. Okay. Beautiful. Hayden, Mr. Dooney.
Yeah, and I think just as further explanation to that, just so there's an understanding here for everybody. So the challenge is when you're turning up at the airport to pick people up, if you don't know how many people are being tested, it's really difficult to send the vehicles and supply the vehicles so that you can segregate those individuals that are being tested on a separate vehicle to be able to come to Norfolk County, right? So it's not, I don't think it's so much people questioning what's the rules and where's the challenges. It's more so, how do I preemptively organize and structure things so that I don't end up in a mess, and I don't end up having a mess for the health unit to be able to deal with when they're integrating with me at my farm once my workers have arrived, if I do get a positive test. I think that's more so the questions that I'm getting, and I think that's what you're getting to as well, Dusty. Is hey, how do things actually look here, and how are things going to be enacted on or determined once we do have that scenario, which is inevitable, I'm sure. Once we do have that scenario turn up, and how does it look? How does it look at the farm once we get here? So the other positive thing in this is we sent a lot of workers home last year, and if you look at the mass testing going out of here, we had a lot lower rates of infection. Call that good luck, call it support from the vaccine, call it maybe there had already been some exposure and there's an immunity buildup. We had a lot of people that went out of here last year that did not get any positive tests on any farms and had 100% of their workers leave, depart, and not have any issues. So I'm hoping that we'll still have that same effect coming back in as well, and maybe we're thinking about a problem that might not be there. So I don't know if you can comment to that at all as well.
I think, well, through chairs, Zamenhof to you, Mr. Dooney, I think this is probably a good time to acknowledge the mountains of work that the farm community has done in protecting their workers. And yeah, you've had some pretty incredible results, both in terms of the vaccination rates in your migrant workers, but also just and the results that those vaccination rates have paid off. So I do anticipate, like, you know, forewarned is forearmed, and you know, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I do anticipate that about 6 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about the pandemic that was rather than the pandemic that is. And that's my great hope. It certainly seems to me like most of the people in my personal life have Omicron right now. Many people at the public health unit have had Omicron in the past few weeks. And I don't think, I think that can only happen, you know, reinfection is possible, but very rare. So I just want to acknowledge all the work that you've done. And I think it's good that you're strategizing ahead of time for how are we going to stop these messes from occurring. Part of, and I'll tell you, we were caught flat-footed as a public health unit. We thought everyone was going to be tested, but it turns out that only some are being tested when they arrive. And I am not sure how this is decided, who gets tested and who doesn't. And so I don't really know how to advise you for how to segregate the tested versus the non-tested when they're rolling into town. But I think at this point, everyone's got a sense of the principles. Everyone's got a sense of like what could happen, and you have to make the best decision at the time. I suppose when you're at the airport and you have the transportation and you have this proportion of workers tested and this proportion of workers untested, I guess to isolate as best you can, to ventilate the bus as best you can, to do the masking as best you can. Maybe some hotel rooms on a case-by-case basis an operator may decide to avail themselves of, but I don't think I can speak generally for what to do in each situation. I can only kind of talk to the general principles at this point.
Okay, Mr. Ryder.
Yeah, I was a little late getting on the call. I was talking to Ken Forth at Farms about a few different situations here, and there is some work being done right now federally with farms, and I think the country's on making this look a little different on the testing of the arriving TFWs for this exact case we're talking about. Farms in CanAg typically will charter a whole plane. There's been some talk on pre-testing. There's been some talk of grouping the randoms together, but it's on the Canadian side of things. So there is quite a bit of conversation going on behind the scenes right now for near future, I think, ideas as this moves forward, and hopefully it gets simplified with what we're finding about Omicron. So there is some things going on to be seen behind the scenes right now. The points Dusty brought up and Hayden's brought up, that's what I was talking to Ken about. Do we need to take those tested workers once we know they're tested, put them in a separate bunkhouse here, but they are going to be close contacts on the bus coming down. So there's a few little hurdles here that need to be ironed out, and it sounds like they are trying to work on that right now. Ever since the email that Farms put out the other day, there has been quite a few questions and a little bit of activity around the TFWs down west end of Ontario and so on and so forth. So things are still being talked about pretty heavily on that, because it is an issue that I think everyone in Ontario is going to deal with, this randomly testing. So it is getting some traction. So that's the only little update I have from talking to Ken this morning.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else? And Dr. Schultz, any other comments? Or
No. Thanks for having me. Like I say, it's hard to shoot from the hip in terms of specifics. But if there are questions that keep arising between now and our next meeting, then please email them to me, and then I can make sure I have a fully thought out response that the whole farms team and the PHIs agree with, and we can adopt corporately, I suppose.
Okay, for sure. Give me Councillor Columbus.
Just a statement to say that hopefully everything can go forward smoothly this year compared to the last two seasons. I know of a couple of farmers who have been longtime vegetable growers, and they are actually closing up shop simply because of the turmoil they've been through in the past couple of years. And I think we can all appreciate where they're coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And if I could leave you on this, Dr. Strauss, I think this is just as we're starting to hopefully, putting this behind us. One thing to keep on your radar is that's going to be happening in the farming community is getting back to bunkhouses and what the future of bunkhouses look like, from both traditional style to looking at hotel style, dormitory style, or trying to because right now the rate, and Trish and Hayden, like on the massive report that they put together last year, Trish, like the average cost, pre the latest inflation and price of a 2x4 and whatnot, are upwards of 18 to 20 now plus $1,000 per man to house. For in Norfolk still is a traditional for lack of a better term, a dirt farming. We're based on seasons versus a greenhouse sector. So our workers are here for 8+ months, depending on how the staggering is. That being said, it's tough to stomach a 20-year mortgage for a bunkhouse that you can only use for certain months of the year. So looking at different models of bunkhouses is going to be questions that you'll probably start seeing across your desk from a health unit perspective, as farmers seemingly never got concrete answers from the federal government as to a universal bunkhouse program, which was all the talk at the beginning of COVID. And we're going to have to start making decisions, with guidance from the health unit as to what does the future of bunkhouses in Norfolk and beyond look like. And maybe it is a situation where Norfolk can lead that charge as to being flexible with different options. And the other part of that is there was talk a couple of years ago from the Ag Advisory Board to looking at these bunkhouses in cooperation with the building code as to when the men and women are not in these bunkhouses in the off season, almost looking at them as secondary income sources, as in Airbnbs or Verbos or something like that. Now that falls under a building code situation, but trying to recoup some of these exorbitant amount of money that farmers are putting in for housing is going to be on the radar coming here very soon as we get through COVID.
Noted. Thank you. I guess I would say that I want to respect my role and the role of the health unit. I think that the health unit has particular interests in bunkhouses during a pandemic. I think that interest really recedes a lot when there is no pandemic. Certainly, it doesn't recede to zero. Like there are more or less healthy quarters, just in general, COVID or no COVID. I would say that as a Canadian who now has spent a lot of time thinking about this, I have ideas and interests, but that's not quite in my role as the medical officer of health. So I wouldn't want to speak to what I think their quarters should look like in general from anything but a public health point of view, at least not in this forum. But I guess to say, I think there are a lot of important questions, and some of them, some of them are of international economic salience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for advocacy and to make sure the best solutions come up. And I will support this community in doing that however I can. But I really would plant a flag that when there's no pandemic, my role and the public health unit's role really has to recede a lot.
Nope, we appreciate that. Thank you kindly, Doctor. If nothing else, we'll appreciate you, Dr. Strauss. If you want to listen to a forestry update, you're more than welcome to. But if not, we appreciate your time, sir.
I am interested, but I have to jump off. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Chair Zemanek, may I ask for a motion to receive Dr. Strauss's presentation as information?
Yes. Can we get a motion to receive Dr. Strauss's information? Hayden, as seconder. Anita. Perfect. Thank you kindly. Information is taken. Thank you, Doctor. Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. We're getting along just fine. We're doing the perfect song and dance. I love it. Okay. Any follow-up or questions for that? I think that was great. It is that again, it's fantastic having the doctor on here for that. Is beautiful. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Doctor, and the health unit. Item 4.2, forestry bylaw update from Mr. Dooney.
Yeah, before we skip off of that, I think it's important that we understand that agriculture's done a lot of thinking about farm worker housing over the last couple of years. And I think there's lots of different objectives running through different people's minds. And I think we need to look at what the best way is to have transparency and conversations, get everybody together and speak with an understanding that we need to be open-minded about different opportunities for, I'm going to call it worker housing as opposed to bunk housing going forwards, because I think there are lots of opportunities out there to be able to make improvements on the system that we have today in agriculture. And I don't know what the best way is to go about that, but I think it's a conversation that needs to start, and it needs to be multifaceted and involve a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. So I'm throwing that out there for conversation, and maybe that's something that Councillor Columbus can add to, just from a perspective of how do we organize and have these conversations at a higher level and move things forwards productively. Because my concern is if we go into this having conversation and on a one-on-one basis, that we might lose some unity on what we're trying to achieve here as an industry. And we need to maximize the support and the back and forth conversation between Norfolk County departments and the agricultural sector.
Dusty?
Yes, sir.
Just a comment. That's something that's crossed my mind quite a bit. I recall a few years ago where a team of turkey hunters wanted to actually utilize a farmer's bunkhouse for a period of time to hunt turkeys. They were from out of the area, so Hayden's right on. It makes more maximum efficient use of what the farmers have to offer in terms of the bunkhouse, cut some of the costs and produce an income. So I think it probably should stay on the agenda as an item to speak about in the future. And it probably would be most important to have Brandon Sloan, who's actually GM of planning and building, to be involved in that conversation in the future. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Maybe Brandon Sloan, Mr. Sloan, we extend an invite to for the next meeting, if he wishes to join and speak on the matter. because farms are quickly always adapting to what's new, and that'd be great if everyone else in the government followed suit and maximizing the resources that we have, especially with with what's happening and the world potentially opening back up. Open the doors to Norfolk. Welcome to Norfolk. Here's what we have to offer. Okay. Beautiful. Moving on to 4.2. Oh, perfect. Yes, Mr. Biddle, if you're online, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dusty, and through you to the rest of the group here. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. I know this group's invested quite a bit of time already on this forest bylaw, so I do appreciate you taking the time for another discussion here today. Hopefully everyone's received the documents that were circulated as part of this meeting invite. There's a few documents there before you, a revised draft version 2, comparison document that compares the current bylaw to the revised draft bylaw number 2, and then a summary of public comments that stemmed from that circulation we did in 2021. I know this review process has been drawn out a little bit. We're a little bit over a year here now working on this bylaw, but things are going to start progressing rather quickly here the first quarter of 2022. So I appreciate you again taking the time to have this discussion today. I've held a number of these stakeholder meetings over the course of the last week or so, and the quickest I've gotten through going through this draft bylaw is about an hour and a half. So I am proposing to do things just a little bit differently here today, just in appreciation of your time. And I acknowledge you have a number of items on your agenda to get through here today. So probably going to focus on kind of the meat and potatoes of the bylaw, being like the exemption portion and the actual general prohibition. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through definitions and sort of the weeds of the bylaw. With that said, I am hoping everyone has taken the opportunity to kind of read through those documents and form your own opinions and stuff. I by no means want to skim over the bylaw and accidentally leave things out, but in the interest of time, I am just going to kind of capture the highlights. What's different between the current bylaw and this draft bylaw. So, just a quick recap of what's been done to date. A draft bylaw was circulated last year, as many of you are aware, and we had a public commenting period which closed in February of 2021. Or sorry, the document was posted in February 2021. Comments closed April 30th, 2021. Those comments have been used to develop this draft bylaw version 2. We've held meetings with yourselves, the Ag Advisory Board. We've met with the Norfolk Woodlot Owners Association a number of times. And I've had a lot of one-on-one discussions with forest industry, sawmill owners, loggers, forestry consultants. And we've had a number of internal meetings, of course, to talk about administrative processes and fees and that sort of thing. Presentation was made to Norfolk County Council on November 16th, 2021. And the purpose of that meeting was to kind of talk about forest policy in general in Norfolk County and tie in how the forest bylaw kind of fits in with that existing forest policy. Starting off here in 2022, we've developed these 3 documents that you were circulated, and we've been holding these stakeholder meetings just to sort of work out any kinks left in the bylaw and kind of get all the group's kind of thoughts on this draft bylaw version 2. As mentioned, this draft bylaw version 2 is a lot closer to our current bylaw than what was circulated last year, so it's a little easier to draw upon comparisons. Moving forward for the rest of the first quarter of 2022, we are expecting to be in front of council in February for the purpose of presenting this draft bylaw version 2 and having some discussion with council about some of these lasting issues or any sort of major issues that need some ironing out, and that those are being brought forward as a part of these stakeholder meetings. Subsequent to that meeting in February, we're hoping to get in front of council in March with the draft bylaw for their consideration. So February would be a presentation, have a discussion. March, we're hoping to have a draft bylaw in front of council for their consideration, and hopefully they would pass that if there are no issues at the following council meeting in March. So as I said, things are going to start moving rather quickly here at the start of 2022, recognizing that we are over a year deep with this review. So with that, I am going to dive into the bylaw and just sort of explain some of the differences between the current bylaw and this draft bylaw that's been circulated. But before I do that, I just want to open the floor if there are any questions or anything on the process or what's been done to date. Seeing no hands being raised, as I'm working through this, oh, go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, sorry. So the draft bylaw, was it, I was just checking my emails here trying to find it. Was it circulated to the Ag Advisory Board?
It
most
should have
recent
been
one?
included. Yeah, it should have been included in the agenda package. Kevin might be able to speak to that.
Through the chair to committee member Dooney, it is on item 4.2 of the agenda. It would be published on our webpage as well as included in the agenda meeting invite link to this Teams meeting.
Okay, and that was the same for the correspondence and feedback in summary. That's on the webpage somewhere, the Norfolk County webpage as well.
That's correct. Yeah, I can recirculate the link after the conclusion of this meeting. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a good note to make. These documents are posted on our website as well, so they can be found. If you were to Google Norfolk County Forest Bylaw, it should pull up these documents. So really quickly, kind of at a high level, but as I go through this, feel free to raise your hand. Interrupt me if you need to. I'm sometimes looking down at my documents here and might not see a hand raised. I do want to have open discussion, answer any questions that you may have. So yeah, just bear with me as we work through this here. So starting on page 13 of the comparison document, so comparing the draft bylaw version 2 to the current bylaw, is where we get into the exemption sections of the bylaw. So the exemption sections and the general prohibition is really the do's and don'ts and where the bylaw doesn't apply to. So exemptions, there's a list of exemptions in the current bylaw that will remain unchanged. These are exemptions that occur in the Municipal Act, so I'm not going to dwell on those. There really is no choice whether they're exempt or not. That is mandated through the Municipal Act. We did remove the following exemptions from the draft bylaw version 2. So currently in the current bylaw, there is an exemption for an owner who is injuring, destroying trees for the purpose of building a structure or structure for which a building permit has been issued. This exemption allows people to clear for the footprint of that building plus 15 meters. There's another exemption that also allows them to clear for to provide utilities to the property for the building which a building permit has been issued, and a lane to access the building for which a building permit has been issued. Those have been removed from the draft bylaw, and primarily to kind of bring in the bylaw in line with other existing county policy. So right now, as it stands, anyone coming into the county that has to go through a zoning amendment or an official plan amendment, even for the purpose of just building a house, oftentimes if there's significant woodland mapped on the property, they are required to do an EIS, or policy states that they should do an EIS. This exemption has created some hiccups, I'll say, internally, just where landowners are a little confused. You know, they're being asked by the planning department to do an EIS, but they're reading the bylaw and saying, well, if I just get a building permit, I don't need to do that. Of course, in those instances, they can't get a building permit because the zoning or official plan does not allow it. We're just saying that in any instance, if you're proposing to clear woodland, that you'll need to apply for a council exemption permit. It sort of gets rid of that blanket exemption for which a building permit has been issued. In my experience, a lot of times where a landowner is proposing to build, oftentimes they want to clear in advance of that anyway. And I have worked with those owners, and they have kind of gone through the council exemption process anyways. That allows them to kind of do some of the preparation work in advance of a building permit. Oftentimes, you know, getting a building permit before the lot is cleared, it creates some confusion, and a lot of times landowners want to get started earlier than that anyway. So I don't see that being a huge issue, but it has been raised in some of the stakeholder discussions that, you know, those 1 acre lots existing now, where really the only practical use for those lots is to build the house. There is some desire to sort of address those. So that's probably something that will be brought up in that February discussion with council. We did include in that first draft last year an exemption for properties that were 1 hectare or less in size. that's something that we may entertain putting back in if it does become that hot of an issue. We'll also be doing a GIS exercise just to figure out how many of those lots actually exist in the county. We're also cognizant of the topic of the lot swaps has come up, and instances where you may want to swap a lot from where it exists now into a woodland. So we also want to be cognizant of that and the impact it may have. So right now our approach is, if you want a clear forest in the draft bylaw, we're saying you have to apply for an exemption permit. That's the biggest thing that was withdrawn from the exemptions. We've also added the following exemptions. So we've added an exemption for the injuring and destruction of trees that are deceased. Currently, we don't regulate the cutting of dead trees in the current bylaw, but we did add it as in an exemption to be explicitly clear that we do not regulate the cutting of dead trees. The injuring or destruction of trees that are an exotic species. So there's a list of exotic species in a schedule of the bylaw, primarily invasive species, things like Manitoba maple, Siberian elm, tree of heaven. Those are explicitly exempt from the bylaw. The injuring and destruction of trees that are 15 years of age or less and growing along the edge of a woodland. Again, this is more to permit headland maintenance and maintenance of woodland edges. Of course, without any maintenance, woodlands will slowly creep out into a field. So we're saying the injuring and destruction of trees 15 years or less along the edge of a woodland is exempt. Also, the injuring or destruction of trees that is part of a normal farm practice and carried out as part of an agricultural operation. So that was also a comment that we received as part of the circulation in 2021. Normal farm practices is more or less exempt from municipal bylaws anyways by its inclusion in the Farming Food Production Protection Act. We've included it in this bylaw just to be more explicitly clear that a normal farm practice is exempt. Of course, it doesn't provide any more clarity as to what a normal farm practice is. We're hoping that, if there's any questions or concerns from a landowner about what is a normal farm practice, we can have some open dialogue with the county. If we can't agree, OMAFR does have an established process to sort of work through that. And we've made the following modifications to exemptions in the current bylaw. So in the current bylaw, a landowner is exempt if they're harvesting trees for their own use, provided that harvesting of trees does not result in any clearing of woodland. And such own use is defined as being 20 logs or 20 cords of fuel wood per year. In the draft bylaw version 2, we've sort of refined own use, and we've defined it as being in volume 11 cords or 20 trees, whichever is greater. So that's sort of in line with the current bylaw being 20 logs and 20 cords is a little bit like 20 logs isn't very descriptive, and it could be a full tree length log or it could be an 8-foot log. It's not very descriptive. Or 20 cords of fuel wood. We're saying 20 trees or 11 cords, whichever is greater. So of course 20 trees could be 20 cords. We're saying 20 trees or 11 cords, whichever is greater. And of course, the same sort of restrictions apply, that it cannot result in any clearing. And we have added in residual basal area for the own use definition and exemption. And that's in line with the residual stocking required after commercial operation. We have received some comments through these stakeholder operations that perhaps the residual stocking may not be ideal for own use. And that's something that we'll be looking at going forward for the February council meeting. So those are changes to the exemptions. Not a whole lot. Like I said, there's a few additions there and a few removals. The big removal being that harvest permit exemption, and the biggest revision being to that own use. So, is there any questions on those before I move on to the general prohibition? Go ahead, Jason. You there, Jason?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
The 11 chords, how do you come to a number of 11 chords?
So 11 chords. There is we use a volume table basically, and we're looking at the current bylaw, and we see 20 cords or 20 logs. And to me, 20 logs is actually significantly less than 20 cords. So in the current bylaw, it was a little bit contradictory in that we had two different units of measurement, and they were quite far apart as far as what they actually equate to in wood volume. The 11 cords is sort of in line with, you know, people that burn firewood for heating their house and that sort of thing. I deal with a lot of those people, and the typical amount, like a homeowner that's heating their house exclusively with wood, would be anywhere between 10 to 15 cords over the course of a winter. And a lot of the times in those cases, the people that I've been speaking to, they're a lot of times buying that themselves anyway. They're not necessarily harvesting that all from their own woodland. So 11 cords is actually quite a bit of wood for someone to process on their own for their own use. Not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure it certainly does. But 11 cords is what we seem to think was pretty reasonable for someone to actually harvest and process from their own woodlot. And then we've also added the 20 trees, whichever is greater. So 20 trees could very well be 20 cords if you're cutting larger size trees, provided you've got that residual stocking, and you can do so. 20 trees could be that 20 cords even. So.
Okay, I just want some clarification on that.
Yep. Go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, so I'm going to applaud you for including right to farm legislation in here as an exemption. Not necessarily that you need acknowledgement, Adam, for how you're interacting with the bylaw, but for the next guy that comes along after you, when they're sitting there, they remember that as well when they're reviewing the bylaw. So I think it's appropriate to add that in there. So that's I think it's a good choice to have that addition. The one thing that you talked about there was the 1 acre versus the 1 hectare versus 0.2 hectares for the regulation, and the potential for that to be able to change. When do you see, like you talked about, hey, if there's feedback that determines that might be appropriate, then that could still be a revision that could be made. How do you want that feedback to be given, I guess, in order to determine whether the 1 hectare versus the 0.2 hectare is an appropriate size parcel of land to regulate?
Right, and if you're talking specifically the parcel of land, is that what you're talking about? The parcel of land that's going to be regulated?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. So definitely if it's and I heard it from my other stakeholder meetings, you know, some people own lots like that. They own a 1 acre lot that's fully forested, and they were always under the impression that, you know, if they got a building permit, they could clear for their building. Now we've removed that building permit exemption. They're wondering what happens with those lots. So this draft bylaw version 2, we've taken out that exemption for the 1 hectare lots or smaller. Certainly if anyone on this group or the Ag Advisory Board in general thinks that it's desirable probably to leave that exemption in to address those, we could certainly look at that. In our discussion with council in February, that's going to be a topic that comes up. We're going to bring up the exemption for building permits and how it's in the current bylaw and how we're looking to remove it and what those impacts are, and how they want to address those impacts. They may find it desirable to leave the exemption in for the building permits, which is an easy enough solution, or we can entertain the idea of putting that exemption for lots 1 hectare or smaller back in. Again, and that addresses, you know, those smaller lots. Right now, the exemption for building permit, it applies to, you know, larger lots as well. So sometimes you have a larger lot and there is open space where you can build, but this building permit exemption really does not necessarily encourage, but people are looking to the woodlands, and they'll want to clear, say, 1 acre, 2 acres of woodland to clear their house, to put their house, even though there is existing open area. So on those larger parcels, we definitely want to encourage, you know, using existing open space if it's available, and if they want to clear woodlands, putting them back in line with every other landowner that wants to do so for any other reason, they would have to get an exemption permit. So that's a wholesome discussion we'll have to have with council, but definitely this group, now that it's been brought to your attention, that's something that you may want to comment on as well.
Yes, so just to give some clarity, Adam, if we got a 1/2 hectare lot in the middle of a field at the moment and it's a wide open field, from an agricultural operation there perspective, they might have woodlots elsewhere on the farm, but this one here doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't add any economic benefit to the farming operation, and with agricultural equipment increasing in size, it creates more of an issue from an economics perspective than it does add value to them. So having the option to be able to remove that 1 hectare lot in the middle of a field, or a half hectare lot in the middle of a field, which if you go to a 0.2 hectare regulation, that kind of it kind of eliminates that undesirable woodlot in the middle of a commercial agricultural operations field from being removed without going through the process and having the discussion. I see that there might be lots of opportunities for busy work there from your perspective, consuming your time doing these permits for these little obsolete, low value woodlot areas when there's probably bigger problems that you can be dealing with. So I think from that perspective, maybe just opening it up to the floor for anybody else who's had that sort of feedback from the Ag Advisory Board through them on that point.
Yeah, and I think maybe we are talking about two different things now that I hear you, that point you made. So I'm talking specifically about properties that are 1 hectare or smaller. That was an exemption we had in the previous draft bylaw. One difference that I didn't touch on because I started right at the exemption section. So the current bylaw, you're right, we regulate right down to 0.2 hectares, which is half an acre. This draft bylaw version 2 that we're looking at, we've changed that to 0.4 hectares, so 1 acre. So essentially those standalone woodlots that are 1 acre or larger would be regulated. Anything smaller than 1 acre in this draft bylaw would not be regulated. So we are upping the regulation size a little bit, going from half an acre up to a full acre. In the bylaw that was circulated last year, we had upped it right to 1 hectare, as that we do see other areas going that way. We received a lot of feedback in that first circulation that said, 1 hectare is too large of an area to ignore. So that's where we've kind of settled on the 1 acre.
Yeah, just for clarification, the people that you got feedback from that said that the 1 acre was too large to ignore, were they agricultural operations or were they private landowners that don't have any investment in woodlots?
A little bit of both. So there were landowners that may have those, and also from forest industry folks as well. So obviously the bylaw got circulated to, sometimes they're not even landowners, but they have an interest in forests in Norfolk. So it was a pretty common comment, I'll say, across the board. Go ahead, Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you. Is that, when we're talking cords, is that a full cord or a phased cord?
We do provide the definition in the bylaw, so it's a full cord. So a 4x4x8 measurement of stacked wood.
Okay, so 11 cords is a pretty good quantity to burn. Thanks.
It's a really good quantity. It's essentially the equivalent of a full log truck of logs, if you were to put it that way. Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you. I'm a little confused. So you opened up by saying that normal farm practice is going to be is a basic exemption because we started the exemption, right? So the normal farm practice is up to 1 hectare in the provincial legislation. Yeah, so it comes back to this 0.4 of a hectare. So are you talking about the 0.4 of a hectare? Is agriculture still exempt outside of this 0.4 of a hectare?
So the agricultural exemption is for normal farm practices, and that's a term that's used in the Farming Food Production and Protection Act. So if a farm operation is carrying on a normal farm practice that results in the injuring or destruction of trees, essentially what the act says is that a municipal bylaw cannot impede with that farm operation.
Right.
Now normal farm.
So now we have 0.4. So it's the 0.4. So I'm understanding this is ag is outside of this 0.4. Like the 0.4 is just for a lot size for anyone that has a like.
So the bylaw applies to all woodlands that are 1 acre or 0.4 hectares or larger in area across the board.
So this includes ag then?
It includes ag. It includes everyone. Yeah. The only the exemption for normal farm practices is for an activity that's being done on a farm that's considered a normal farm practice that results in the injuring destruction of trees.
So the intention of this bylaw would be over 0.4, then ag would be regulated too. So we would be more regulated than what the provincial act says. Am I understanding that right?
The provincial act, which provincial act are you talking about?
Normal farm practice is 1 hectare.
Normal farm practice doesn't define, I think, anything by hectare. It relates just to an activity on a farm that's considered standard for farm operations in that area. This bylaw establishes in Norfolk County that the injuring or destruction of trees in areas that are 1 acre or larger is regulated. Whether you're a farmer, whether you're an individual landowner, regardless, this bylaw applies to all woodlands 1 acre or larger.
Okay.
Now, if you happen to be undertaking a normal farm practice that results in the injuring and destruction of trees, you would be exempt. And you would be exempt as per the bylaw, the draft bylaw, or that exemption is kind of written into the Farming Food Protection Act, which states that a municipal bylaw will not impede a normal farm practice carried on as part of an agricultural operation. It creates confusion a little bit because there's no list of defined practices that are considered a normal farm practice. And this is some of the turmoil that term's caused. But at the end of the day, if there's any conflict, I'll say, between a municipal bylaw and an agricultural operation, OMAFRA does have an established process to mediate between those two parties. So they'll mediate between the county and between the farmer, and they will try to come to a resolve, withstanding any sort of resolution. If no resolution can be reached between the municipality and that farm operation, they would go to a normal farm practices hearing. And that normal farm practices hearing is what establishes A, what is being carried out. Is it a normal farm practice or isn't it? And B, is the municipal bylaw impeding that normal farm practice?
Yeah, okay.
So we've had an instance in Norfolk before where a landowner was clearing and they were claiming it was for the purpose of normal farm practices. They were straightening a field edge. We had a different opinion in stating that, clearing of woodland is not a normal farm practice. That one did go to the Normal Farm Practices Board, and they established that the activity that farmer was carrying out in that particular instance was not a normal farm practice. And further, that the bylaw, because we do have an exemption process in our bylaw where a landowner can apply to clear forested land, the bylaw actually did not impede them from clearing forested land anyway. They just chose to not follow the process established in the bylaw.
Okay.
So normal farm practices can be a little bit hairy depending on how you want to interpret it. And there is no set list of what's considered a normal farm practice. It does rely a little bit on the municipality and the agricultural operation having open discussion and essentially trying to resolve it without hopefully going to the need for any legal sort of intervention. Go ahead, Hayden.
I think it was at the last meeting, you brought Kevin, and I can't remember Kevin's last name, and he was providing an overview as a third party of the updated bylaw. One of the conversations that we had was that he didn't value a lot silver pasture activities, and he kind of gave his own opinion on the perspective of whether that was contributing to the woodlot or detracting from the woodlot. That aside, what's your view on based on having normal farm practices accommodated in the bylaw and that being kind of a driving factor or leading factor, even if it wasn't? What's your view on silver pasture? Other activities inside of woodlots, I can't think of anyone. That's the main one that kind of popped out to me. What I brought forward at the last meeting is what we don't want to do here is inhibit people being innovative in the agricultural industry. And that kind of, it popped out and struck a bit of a nerve with me, his comments there at the last meeting. So I don't know if you can kind of update us on your views or perspective on that, and how this contingency of normal farm practices being in the bylaw accommodates good agricultural practices and economic drivers within the industry as they relate to woodlots.
Right. So, and silvopasture obviously was a bit of a hot topic during this whole process. It's come up in a number of discussions and stuff. And obviously we do have one farmer, I think Brett's on the call today, who's implemented this silvopasture technique, which I'd say, you know, prior to Brett and Skylar Farms implementation of silvopasture, I think you could probably successfully argue it's not what we would consider a normal farm practice, as it hasn't been done in the area regularly, but it does capitalize, you know, on innovation and new practices that could be developed into a normal farm practice. So with relation to silvopasture specifically, I would say its implementation is key. How it's implemented, you certainly couldn't just go in and smash a forest and put sheep in there and say it's silvopasture. There does have to be some you know, best practices or some common sense approach as far as how it's implemented, because those activities can have a very drastic negative effect on woodland. So we don't want to see livestock being used as a method to basically destruct forest, because that can be the end result. At the end of the day, unregulated pasturing of livestock in woodlands, there's lots of literature out there to say that is a negative impact. It does restrict regeneration. It does have a negative impact to the health of trees, and it's been done a lot in the early 1900s and leading up to the middle of the century. So I think we know that pasturing of livestock in woodlands is bad generally, but the concept of silvopasture and intensive rotation of livestock through woodlands is definitely something new to Norfolk and new to, I'm going to say, Ontario. There's some research coming out of the UK and the States on silvopasture, but certainly it's not widespread and it's not widely implemented in Ontario. So we're kind of learning as you go, I'd say, in Norfolk County, and I've been in discussion with Skylar Farms and kind of watching their operation closely and how they implement it. I'd say at this point in time, from a bylaw perspective, it's not a hard and fast no on our end, seeing as we've got a little bit of experience with silvopasture now. We do have a farmer in the area that's implementing it, and he's more or less learning the kind of best practices as you go. So we definitely don't want to stifle innovation, and we don't want to stifle farm practices, but we do want to be cognizant of the potential for major negative impacts to the woodland. So I would hope if there are any other farm operations or agricultural operations looking to implement silvopasture, that they'd be reaching out to people like Skylar Farms, getting sort of those best management practices, and then having that open discussion with us as well. It's no different than any other operation or forestry operation that falls outside of these exemptions. If you're injuring destruction of trees of a forest, it's going to be regulated by the forest bylaw. So rather than going ahead and just doing that under the premise that you're doing a normal farm practice, have that dialogue with us first. You know, we can sort of work with you to do what's best, and we're definitely not going to shut the door on, you know, something like that. And if you talk to Brett, I think he would tell you, like, it's an expensive endeavor, and I don't think if people are going to use that as an excuse to clear woodland, I think they're going to be out a lot of money if they're trying to do it the right way. So as long as people are willing to work with us and be forthcoming, it's a lot easier to address those instances before the destruction to woodland happens, and we can kind of put our best foot forward as far as implementing a practice such as that. Sort of the political answer, I guess. But I don't know if that.
It's a hard one to write in the bylaw, but as long as there's an open-mindedness there, and there's an approach that appreciates new and evolving techniques inside of woodlots, because what you don't want to do is shut the door to value adds in an agricultural industry. I like to make sure that people have the opportunity to try different things, and you definitely don't want to be closed-minded when it comes to respecting new techniques that can be implemented inside of woodlots.
Yeah, and I try to draw the comparison amongst even, you know, silvicultural operations that we apply in forestry. Like, there's a lot of understory treatments and treatments to, you know, the understory of a forest that to get things like oak regeneration. So I mean, in forestry, it's not uncommon. Like a shelter would cut, you typically clear the understory and you space your crop trees. The approach is very similar in silvopasture, so I try and draw comparisons between, farm operations such as that and also forestry operations. So the principles are the same. So yeah, I don't see why there's any reason why we can't implement something like silvopasture if we do similar things for the purpose of restoration and silviculture. So
Thanks, Adam.
with all that said, I will jump into the general prohibition section here. And I'm not going to go through it piece by piece because that is the sort of thing that does draw on these reviews. But I am going to speak at a high level, just sort of what the changes are and what we're trying to go for in the changes. So in the current bylaw, we regulate commercial forestry operations. And I should say, if you're reading this general prohibition section, it implies that you're already not exempt from the bylaw. And quite frankly, typically you're applying for a harvest permit and you're going to undertake some sort of forest operation. So in the current bylaw, we sort of recognize forestry operations in 3 different categories. We have what's called a good forestry practices operation. That's where you hire a forester, they prepare a silvicultural prescription, the tree marking is implemented in accordance with that prescription, and then the trees are harvested. We have what's called a stand improvement harvest. So trees are infested with disease, insect. We see that with emerald ash borer, beech bark disease, and a landowner wants to harvest those trees. So that allows a landowner to harvest those trees that are clearly infested or in decline, and without the requirement of having a residual stocking. And the last method of harvesting is what we call circumference limit. So that's a harvest that's regulated by the size of tree. So a tree gets so big you can cut it, but there has to be a residual stocking left after the fact. In the draft bylaw, we're sort of doing away with those categories. A harvest permit is a harvest permit, and if you're applying for a harvest permit, there's just the one form. We do still acknowledge that if you hired a forester, you prepared a silviculture prescription, you still submit that with your harvest permit application, and we assess the marking accordingly. There's no requirement for that residual stocking. Should you not have a forester involved with a silvicultural prescription, we did maintain that you still have to have that same residual stocking. So in forestry, we refer to residual stocking as basal area. And that basal area is the same in the current bylaw as it is in the draft bylaw. The only change is in the current bylaw, we say you have to have 16 meters squared per hectare. In the draft bylaw, we say you have to have 16 meters squared per hectare, but of those 16 meters squared per hectare, that has to be good growing stock. So in the current bylaw, what we're finding is when operators undertake a forestry operation and they mark a woodlot, they harvest the trees, they may be meeting that residual stocking, so they may be leaving enough trees. But what we're finding is sometimes those trees they might be beech trees that are going to decline in the next 10 years and die. They may be ash trees that are going to decline, or they may just be a poor quality tree that is going to decline and not be there in the long term. So they are meeting the requirements of the bylaw, but we know long term it's not good because the trees they're choosing to leave are not the right trees. So in the draft bylaw, we're saying that there has to be some consideration to what's being left behind. Those trees have to be AGS quality. We define AGS quality as a tree that's essentially going to either maintain its quality or improve in quality over the next 15 years. That's been generally well received by forest industry. The good operators that are marking bush and carrying out these operations, they're already doing that. It really is to get away from some of the operators that are simply high grading and leaving poor quality trees behind in the forest. We also made the requirement that of that 16 meters squared per hectare, 3 meters squared per hectare has to be in a larger size class. So it has to be 50 centimeters at breast height, the trees, or larger. That is a new provision. We've ran the numbers over the course of the last year and a half on all our woodland assessments. And for the most part, most operations are meeting this requirement already. But again, there are a number of operations where there is zero regard for what's being left behind. They are taking all the large trees, leaving all the smaller size trees, which currently passes in the current bylaw, but we know it's not a good practice and it's not what's good for the forest. So we are saying in this draft bylaw that there needs to be some consideration for leaving some larger size trees. And again, looking at the harvest over the course of the last year and a half, I'd say 92% of them are making that right now. There's just a handful that are really kind of abusing the system currently. We've removed any requirement in reference to harvesting on properties that are in the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program or Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program. Those programs carry with them their own list of requirements that landowners have to adhere to. In the current bylaw, we say that if you're harvesting on those properties, you have to do it with a forester with a prescription. In the draft bylaw, we're saying that's not the case. Landowners are responsible for maintaining their eligibility in those programs. The bylaw is not going to regulate those properties any different than any other property. There's also a long list in the current bylaw of things that a person shall or shall not do in a woodland. For example, a person shall not harvest or injure a tree that is to remain standing after a harvest, operate a vehicle or equipment that results in excessive damage to soils, wetlands, operate a vehicle or conduct operations in a manner that leaves a part of a tree in a water course, cut a tree and leave the treetop higher than 3.5 meters. These are all lists that are in the current bylaw that we're removing from the draft bylaw. And at the end of the day, a lot of these are stipulations that they apply to basically commercial operations. So these are conditions that we would put on a permit. They do not necessarily need to be included in the bylaw. If we include them in the bylaw, we really are saying that if you cut a tree in your woodland, you need to process that top lower than 3.5 meters. We're not regulating that. We are regulating commercial operations. So we saw a whole list of things in there that don't necessarily need to be in the bylaw, but they would be addressed at the time we actually issue a permit, and they would be regulated that way. So we've really done away with a lot of the wording in the draft bylaw that way. That is really the nuts and bolts of the big changes. We've made some small changes when it comes to harvest permits. Quicker turnaround times. Currently we have 45 days. We're bumping that down to 20 days. We say a permit could be issued up for a year with a year renewal. In the draft bylaw, we're just saying we'll put an expiry date on it. We could renew that as many times as we want. And then the other section I'll spend a little bit of time on today because it does tend to come up more in the agricultural sector than other sectors is in relation to exemption permits. So these are permits that you would use to apply if you were proposing to, say, clear any area of woodland and you were looking for exemption from the bylaw. So I would say our agricultural sector is the probably largest user of these exemption permits. For the most part, in my experience, when we're talking about clearing forest, it's either related to two things. It's either related to an agricultural operation, either increasing workable land or improving agricultural efficiencies, or it's related in some way to development, either in town or even in the rural areas. So I'll just run through how it works in our current bylaw, and then I'll run through really quickly some of the changes we're proposing. So in the current bylaw, if you wanted to clear an area of land, and again, this is an area of land that is 1/2 acre or larger. Anything less than 1/2 acre, we do not regulate. You would make your application to the county with your prescribed fee. Any areas that are greater than 1 hectare currently require an environmental impact study. We send notification to all adjacent landowners who abut the land. The bylaw officer can issue a permit for areas that are 1/2 acre or less. A bylaw officer may issue a permit for areas that are larger, provided there have been no written objections filed with the county. If there have been any objections filed with the county on these applications, currently they are pushed to the Bylaw Appeals Committee for a decision. So the Bylaw Appeals Committee is 3 members of council. They would hear the applicant, they would hear from the county, and then they would hear from any opposition to the application, and they would make a final decision on it. Just a few subtle changes we're proposing to this process. So starts the same way. You're going to make your application to the county with your prescribed fee. The county may request additional information from the applicant, such as an environmental impact study. So there's not an automatic requirement for the environmental impact study. It is kind of discretionary on the bylaw officer. This is more or less to address in instances where the proposed clearing does impact what we have mapped as, say, significant woodland in our official plan. Other county policy states that if you are impacting a significant woodland, you must do an EIS. So we want to kind of be in line with other existing county policy in that respect. Similarly, if the area is not in a significant woodland and it is greater than a hectare, say it's a plantation area greater than a hectare, we may not necessarily require an EIS if it's something relatively straightforward. In the current bylaw, that it's really just that size threshold. If it's greater than a hectare, you need an EIS. We want a little more discretion. It may be larger than a hectare, but be relatively insignificant, and you can tell that on the face. We wouldn't require an EIS in those cases. The notification system, the notification to adjacent owners stays the same. Rather than directly abutting the land, we just set a threshold of 100 meters. That comes into play more so in the urban areas where the clearing relates to development. And we received a lot of flack when we do the circulation and we just circulate landowners who abut the property, recognizing that in a urban setting, the clearing of that woodland does have farther reaching impacts to neighboring landowners. You have neighbors right on top of each other essentially. So we've used a 100-meter threshold for the circulation. The notification is sent to other county departments, similar to how it is today, and other agencies that may have an interest in the application, such as the LPRCA if it impacts a wetland. And at the end of the day, a bylaw officer may approve the application or deny the application. So we may receive written comments on it. Currently, if we receive comments, it's automatically deferred to the Bylaw Appeals Committee. We're saying even if we receive comments, the bylaw officer still has the authority to make the decision on the application. Should they issue the permit and there be issues with the conditions or terms on the permit, they could appeal that to the Bylaw Appeals, or if the bylaw officer denies the permit, they could appeal to the Bylaw Appeals Committee. So that's the only method that it would get deferred to Bylaw Appeals, is if the bylaw officer denies it or the applicant objects to any terms and conditions. Whereas right now, basically, we receive any written correspondence on the application and it's going to Bylaw Appeals Committee. So that has created some issues where, you know, sometimes those written objections, you can read them and you can kind of decide yourself whether there's any merit on it or not. And in any case, if the bylaw officer has any concerns or doesn't feel fully comfortable with approving the permit, they can deny it, and the applicant can always appeal that to Bylaw Appeals. So they're not dead in the water. They still have an avenue to get that approved. Is there any discussion on exemption permits before we move on and kind of open up to general discussion? They tend to work fairly smoothly now. Like I'd say we issue probably anywhere between 2 to 10 of these permits a year, and they are generally for minor clearing. Half an acre is pretty common for isolated patch of trees in the middle of a field. With moving away from the half acre and up to 1 acre, I anticipate we'll see even less of these applications where a landowner wants to clear, you know, less than an acre. As long as it's isolated and not attached to another existing woodland, they could do so without a permit. So we'll probably see less of these applications in the future with that. Go ahead, Ann.
I'm just curious if part of the process still goes to NEAC committee.
So NEAC, the Norfolk Environmental Advisory Committee, was disbanded either last year or a year before. So right now we don't really have a great process for reviewing things like environmental impact studies and stuff. It is done in-house and in conjunction with the Long Point Region Conservation Authority, but there is no, we'll say, civil committee that reviews these applications anymore, no. So with that, I think I've kind of touched on the major changes, we'll say, and they're not, I'm not going to say they're major changes, but those are the more significant changes to the current bylaw, to the draft And again, the intent would be to present this draft as written and as you're seeing it to council in February, and just have some of these discussions on things like the size of woodland that's regulated, the exemption for building permits, for example. We've also heard from some of these stakeholder reviews that, you know, things like even treed fence rows, which we are explicitly exempting. There is some interest in regulating those as well. So those are just sort of some of the topics that we intend to highlight with council come February. But definitely I'd be looking for input from this group or any individuals leading right up to the day we go to council in February with any concerns or comments you may have. So go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, so just a couple of quick ones. So I do have the draft bylaw. It was in the agenda. I didn't realize I only went through page 1, so I'll review that in more detail. So thanks very much for including that. You just talked about regulating fence rows. I premise that with a conversation on agricultural operations that probably likely put those fence rows in place, and they're there for a form of agricultural practice. As agricultural practices on the cultivation side have changed, there may not be the same need as there was before for those fence rows. So please make sure that we understand and consider that before we make a blanket statement on it. I think that's important. The other one that we haven't discussed here this morning was bylaw enforcement and the right to be able to go onto people's land without notifying. I don't have a woodlot, but I would suggest if I had a woodlot and you came in and or your staff came in and you're on my land and didn't make a reasonable effort to notify me, it's probably going to start things off on a bad foot. My suggestion is from that perspective, and I think there's a lot of conversation around this. Actually, Will Stoneman is on the from the OFA is on the call as well, and I know he's been getting quite a bit of feedback in regards to bylaw enforcement coming onto people's property without notification. My suggestion is there needs to be some reasonable means to be able to notify, or reasonable attempt to be able to notify people when you're going onto their property. And I think that's beyond common courtesy. It's just going to put your bylaw enforcement agents in a better position to be able to have conversation when they're going onto property. At the end of the day, you can enact your enforcement rights if the conversation goes south and they don't wish to have you on their property. You can tell them that you have the right to be able to do that, but to just start it off with not informing or notifying somebody going onto the property, I think you're putting yourself in a bad position to be able to start the conversation. That's my comment, and I don't know if you can open it up to Will Stoneman, if that's appropriate, to have some feedback on what he's received as a member of the OFA, as a representative of the OFA, what feedback he's been receiving from the agricultural industry on it.
Yeah, so really quickly on the treed fence rows, yep, you're absolutely right. A lot of times those fence rows are put in as a result of the agricultural community. And if you get back to even looking at the term normal farm practice, and then how we spend a lot of time talking about there's no list of defined practices that are defined as normal farm practice, I think arguably you could make the case that planting, maintaining, and removal of treed fence rows might fall into that category of being a normal farm practice. It's something that's been done definitely, since the early 1900s. They've been going in and they've been manipulated, maintained, removed ever since. So I think treed fence rows is something that would be complicated by that normal farm practices thing. So from a staff perspective and someone who's developing the bylaw, I don't really necessarily have any interest in regulating treed fence rows. And then in tying in with the bylaw enforcement, of course, that's something that doesn't just pertain to the forest bylaw, it pertains to all bylaws. And generally speaking, it's different from area to area. I mean, a lot of different areas have a different philosophy with bylaw enforcement. Sometimes it's, getting charges and getting enforcement. Sometimes it's just seeking compliance and working with the landowner. And definitely I find in a rural municipality in a small community like Norfolk County, definitely compliance is usually the biggest factor. We're not necessarily seeking enforcement and penalties. We're seeking compliance. So with that, working with a landowner, giving notification, in my experience with doing bylaw, that's been obviously a hot topic and it's come up lots. And we've changed our practices a lot in terms of providing that notification and trying to work with landowners where we can. With that being said, you see a 20-acre woodlot being clear cut clearly from the road, you know, sometimes there's the need for intervention right away, and showing up and talking with that operator and getting the landowner information and contact information right then and there from the operator, and then having that conversation. You may be on the person's property already, but you are seeking out their information and stuff. There's a lot of different scenarios that come up in respect to that. So, but definitely your comments have been heard about the concern, biosecurity, and just knowing who's on your property. So those are practices that we do try and implement. So I will just turn it over to Will Stoneman if he's on, since Hayden has mentioned your name on this topic, if you had anything to add here.
Yeah, thanks Hayden, and thanks Adam too. And it was just revolving around more of the biosecurity of the farm operation as well. And I probably speak on behalf of Brett Schuyler on this one too, pertaining to the sheep operation in the Silva pasture. The liability of the landowner, I don't know what onus that falls on, the county or the landowner, but Brett does have those dogs that do protect the sheep, and anything outside of a sheep tends to be a predator. So things like that are new to you guys, Adam, as far as the Silva pasture goes in the county, how do you plan to handle that sort of a situation?
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with the Silva pasture and the dogs, and certainly in those instances, yeah, I'm not stepping foot in those Silva pastures without Brett for those reasons. So, and like I said, just in my experience in dealing with enforcement and stuff over the course of the last 10 years, and hearing, you know, a lot of the concerns from landowners, it's you know, they're reasonable concerns with knowing who's on your property and having concerns like that. Obviously, from a liability perspective, the county carries liability, and any employees acting within their role with the municipality, you know, we are insured through our workplace. But with that being said, there is something to be said for worker safety and stuff, even for the county too, right? So we don't want to be putting our employees in situations where they're going to be at risk of injury or anything like that. Yeah, I think the easiest solution is a lot of times, yeah, reach out to the landowner, try and speak to them before getting onto the property. But I did just want to make the note that if you have an excavator tearing down a forest, I think there's very little concern about there being sheep in the woodland or biosecurity at that point if you're carrying on an operation like that. So in instances like that, I mean, there is going to be the need to respond. So it kind of depends on the situation, but I think most situations there is the opportunity to touch base with the landowner first.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. All my other questions were answered in your previous comments there, so I applaud you guys for putting that together so quickly and complimenting agriculture in it as well. So thanks a lot. Thanks,
Will. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I don't think I really have any new comments. Most of them are the same. Similar to Will, 10.2, I had highlighted when I was reading through. I would really appreciate if you did add, you know, that you put some sort of reasonable effort into contacting the landowners. We could have hunters out there too, right? Biosecurity, all those things. I think there should be an effort put into contacting landowners. And then going back again to that, I think you would have got a lot more comments from the agricultural committee or community if it was at 0.4 of a hectare, which you have it as now, because when you sent that out for comment, it was at 1 hectare. Mm-hmm. So I do want to reintegrate that again. I know we've hashed it out a little bit, but most other municipalities are at 1 hectare. So we are, once again, unique in Norfolk.
In my review of other bylaws, it seems to be pretty split, actually. There's a lot that do regulate right down to the 1/2 acre, and then there's some that are going 1 hectare. And of course, there's a lot of municipalities, the upper tiers, that are regulating right down to individual tree. I don't think that's something we necessarily need to talk about at this meeting. We're not looking at regulating right down to individual tree, but as it stands right now in the draft bylaw version 2, I mean, it is moving up from 1/2 acre up to 1 acre, which I think is a pretty reasonable approach. Recognizing that, you know, even a 1 acre woodlot, there is some value and there is some significance in that, especially in Norfolk County, where, you know, we are a hotbed for species at risk and that sort of thing. And some of these species rely on those smaller fragmented woodlands, even though they generally carry with them a lower value. There is some significance there. So We found the 1 acre seemed to be a happy medium, but obviously willing to take comments to the contrary and bring that forward as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all your effort too, Adam. I read through most of the stuff last night and you try to be transparent, and I appreciate that.
Perfect. Yeah, and thank you. We are trying to be as transparent as possible. This isn't the Adam Biddle bylaw or anything like that. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I do see opportunity for some improvements and things to make the bylaw better from a harvesting standpoint, and also just in relation to the agricultural operations. So.
Chair Zemanek, if we want to start with the stakeholder engagement, if there are no other questions from committee. And I'm going to ask that Adam facilitate the individual stakeholders on the line and call on them, and we can proceed with their comments and concerns in an orderly fashion.
Yep, absolutely, Kevin. And Adam, before I hand the phone, the mic back to you, Kevin, is there any time limits? Like, I know we have for presentations, there's a 5-minute max. Does a similar program apply for this sort of situation as well? In the event that it does, anything does run long?
Through the chair to committee, I would recommend to do the same principles as a public hearing committee for planning departments, where we have like a registered speaker and try and limit to 5 minutes, keep an eye on the clock, and then give them a 1-minute warning if it exceeds or starts to near towards the 5-minute mark.
Okay, thank you kindly, Kevin. Adam, the mic is yours, sir.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, there were a number of people that were invited to this meeting, more or less to listen in and get the information and participate in the conversation as well. So I don't know if they'll all necessarily have anything to say. Will Stoneman was a late addition by Mr. Dooney there, so appreciate him joining us today. I guess since you've already talked, Will, we'll give you an opportunity here if you have anything further to add.
The only thing I wanted to add further, and it was more geared toward what Anne Vermeesh said there too, as well as a little more public education towards the tree bylaw. I think it would complement your division very well if you did a little more outreach through, like Chris Garwood. I think he's on the line here. He does an excellent job of sending that information out through the bulletin. I think just add a little more public education towards the bylaw would go a long ways, Adam. And that was the only additional information, only additional comment that I needed to add.
Perfect. Thank you. Much appreciated. Working through our other list of invitees, I see Brett, you're on the call here. Did you have anything to add, Brett?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity, but no, it's no, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, we also had invited representatives from the Norfolk Federation of Agriculture, and I'm not too sure if we have any of them on the line. Looking through the list of participants here, I don't see any names, but there is one phone number. I'm not too sure who we have here, ending in 0674.
That'd be me, Ted Smith, president of the NFA.
Okay, perfect. Did you have anything to add here, Ted, as part of the discussion today?
I currently did not. I've been in discussion with both Brett and Will Stoneman, and he's kind of gotten the NFA and OFA's stance on this quite well, actually.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us today. I don't want to miss anyone. We did have invite to Keese and Hetty Mayard as well, as they had shown an interest in the bylaw and have been submitting comments to us. I think I was informed that they would not be able to attend today. So we'll definitely reach out to them, share this recording with them, and I'll be making sure to receive any correspondence from them directly as well. So aside from that, I think that takes care of our invitee list here there, Kevin.
Thanks, Adam. Through the chair, may I have a motion, if there's no other questions regarding the forestry bylaw, stakeholder engagement, may I have a motion to receive the presentation by Adam as information? and any comments by stakeholders.
Looks like Ann, seconded by Hayden. Well, Mr. Biddle, I appreciate it. There's a lot in here, a lot to navigate. Appreciate the transparency, and as always, like we extend to Dr. Strauss and to you as well. Like I said, the transparency and being here, letting the voice and the concerns, working with everybody, and it's no small task, and we appreciate it, sir.
No, I appreciate the time you guys have taken to spend reviewing this and supplying your comments and listening to me for these 3 meetings. So much appreciated.
Thank you kindly. Have a great week. Okay. Any comments from the board that weren't expressed already? Okay. Seeing none. Moving to item 4.3, Mr. Zvi.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I will share my screen here. I want to give everyone an update on one of the economic recovery plan projects. It's the Business Accelerator, and share some information about the upcoming launch of the accelerator and just get some thoughts on how best to maybe promote one of the programs that I think is specifically geared at the farming community. So I will start with the overall page. So the project is, as I said, it's part of our economic recovery plan, which we keep moving forward and implementing new pieces of the plan. This one is called BRINC, which is Business Resources in Norfolk County. And really what it is a business accelerator. It's for entrepreneurs who are either existing entrepreneurs that want to scale their business, or people who are net new prospective entrepreneurs who are looking to potentially start a new business. It's for both kinds, and we have projects and programs for both. And it covers courses, it covers cohort-based programs where a group of people go through multiple weeks together, mentorship, one-on-one coaching, information about access to capital, etc. So what I wanted to talk to this group about, so there's a web page dedicated to describing overall BRINC and all of the pieces of the BRINC. What I wanted to talk to the group about was 2 things. So first, there's the launch itself. And I don't know if you can see that when I change screens. Do you see a green little rocket ship, or are you still seeing the website?
The website, Steve.
The website. Okay, so I might have to cancel that and just go back in. I just want you to be able to see all the pieces separately. Okay, so this is the launch. So we're actually launching the overall program, the BRINC overall program, and that is happening on February 3rd from 5 to 7 p.m. And this is just a launch for anyone who's interested, in learning about the overall program. We'll have speakers from each of the entrepreneurship training programs. We're aiming to have Mayor Chop open it. We're hoping to have Christine Carey from Venture Norfolk. They are partners on the program to come and talk about their partnership and of course the access to capital piece. And so this is just an introductory 2 hours to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, etc. So I can send this out. The part that I really wanted to talk to you about was this one. And it is called Farm to Retail, and this is one of the first projects that's coming out of BRINC. And so this is a 10-day, or it says 10-day, it's actually a 10-session Farm to Retail boot camp. And this is for any farmers or entrepreneurs that would like to create value-add products that can get onto store shelves. So as I said, 10 sessions. Covering everything from the feasibility of the idea, how to do the market research, how to research competitors and competitive analysis, what channels are available to them, formulating a business model and a lean canvas for how to take this product to market and what value it adds and pricing and partnerships, etc. It covers everything from the food science piece of it to food labeling to branding, social media, and then ultimately how to build those partnerships and get these products onto store shelves, and from maybe initially smaller retailers and then scaling onto the larger, more national brands. Although a lot of the national brands, Loblaws included, they are assigning a portion of their shelf space to locally made foods now, and so this is a good time for entrepreneurs that are looking to get into that sort of business. So this is the one that I really wanted to talk to Ag Advisory about. And so there's this program will be 2 classes per week starting on February 14th. So it'll be every Monday and Wednesday for 5 weeks. And as I said, it comes with some one-on-one mentorship time. All of our courses come with one-on-one mentorship, coaching, and learning about access to capital and how to fund the project. So, Rady, I wanted to let the advisory board know about this, about the launch, about this program, and hopefully I can send it out. And if you're willing, please share it with your neighbors, your networks, anyone else that you think might be interested in this. We'll also be sharing it with the farmers markets, with the associations, and with our own, lists of people. But we have 15 spots, I believe, in this particular boot camp. So it would be great to get 15 Norfolk County entrepreneurs that are interested in launching this kind of business or scaling this kind of business. You might already be selling at a farmer's market, but you want to go beyond a farmer's market. This is the perfect program. And from what I've heard from our peers and other accelerator programs in Barrie, in Innisfil, and we asked a few of them, this program has been very, very popular and very successful. They've had some really great success stories coming out of it. So that's pretty much it, and happy to answer any questions. But really, I'm just looking for you guys to help amplify it and any thoughts that you had in general.
Well, first off, this is awesome. If I could pipe in and give you the high five, the 10-day, like, that boot camp's awesome. So that's a really neat effort, and happy to share however we can. And I think we should also be promoting it for both new and for people that are also longstanding. Right, long-standing suppliers reinventing the wheel, because that's also a huge side as well, because either new products or selling it differently. And that section that my local Zaire's of the areas and the walls that are grown locally, that seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Where we used to be one shelves with marinades, and now it's everything. So kudos, that's great.
Thank you.
Any comments from the board?
I guess I have a quick question. We were the reason we're going so quickly with this one, and we're putting it up front, and then the other programs, we've got one that's called e-commerce rock stars, that anyone wants to take their business that's currently online and scale it and start selling throughout the province and even throughout Canada. That's a separate cohort. We have another one that's Innovation Factory. That's for anyone who wants to broadly start a business with new product development built into it. Those are going to come after this farm to retail one. We're starting with this one first, and straight out of in the beginning of the year in February, because we were told that if you wait too long, farmers are going to have a tougher time as you get into later into the season. So does that make sense? Like early February to be done, mid February to kind of early March and be done. Does that make sense from a farming community perspective, from a timeline for timelines?
Well, I don't want to be a wet blanket, but yes, from a execution level, but from a planning level, I don't want to sound like a crotchety old farmer, but realistically, November is the ideal time, because ordering seed or if you're doing trays or you're getting all that stuff ready, the winter is more ideal. But this springtime, yeah, doing it right now, in my mind, is, you know, there's no time like the present, especially for test trialing a project. This is great for seeing the viability on a small scale. Absolutely, yeah. Now is the time.
Okay, and if it is successful, we can bring it back again. If
yeah,
you know, if there's a good turnout and people are giving it good grades, that we could definitely do it again. So that's the benefit of it. I see Councillor Columbus has his hand up.
Yes, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for Norfolk entrepreneurs. Just when the downturn of the tobacco industry occurred back in the late 1980s, and Trish will recall this as well, we actually had a program that was financed by the federal government at the time, Community Futures, Norfolk Community Futures. It was headquartered out of the Venture Norfolk office, actually. And it was in cooperation with Fanshawe College. And it was called Entrepreneurs in Agribusiness way back then. And we had people going into fish farming and peanuts and all those different things that you see today in the marketplace. Not all of them were successful, mind you, and some of the people have retired already. But that was back in the late 1980s. And I think we have enough entrepreneurs in Norfolk County here that this will be successful. So I commend you for this initiative. See?
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear it. Venture Norfolk is a partner with us, and they will be bringing their own resources and expertise in raising capital to this project. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that.
Zvi, okay, no, we'll stay on this right now. Any other questions for Zvi? Anita.
Yeah, thanks, Dusty. Zvi, I know I came across this probably in my social media feed yesterday, but in trying to refer this information to people in our community that might have interest, what is the easiest way to send that information to them? Where is this listed?
Yeah, I will send everything out to the board, and you'll have all of the information. All of the information is currently listed on the website, which is just norfolkcounty.ca/brink. So BRINC. All of the information is listed there. The application form, the registration for the opening event, where we'll have, you know, entrepreneur speakers talking about their journey. We'll have a deep dive into each of the programs from the people who are actually going to be conducting the programs. So the entrepreneurs will have the ability to ask questions. How is this going to work? What can I expect? But yeah, I'll send all of that information out via email today. And so you'll have that program. And we are also this week really ramping up on the marketing piece. So if you haven't seen it online yet, you should start seeing it online very, very soon on Facebook, but also press release. You should see ads in the Reformer, and then little ads on digital, you know, websites here and there. We'll do some programmatic stuff. So you should, you know, people should start seeing it fairly soon.
So I'd just like to say congratulations on putting together such a complete program. It looks exceptional for those of us that have gone through this personally. This is going to benefit many others that are looking to be innovative with their farming and food products. So congratulations.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Zvi, is there, so beyond this, we can talk later about other avenues of, because from being an entrepreneur myself and going through it with the brewery, I know like the avenues, sort of a third party beyond Norfolk's, people like Blog Norfolk, or even like the recent sort of massive success of like the folk clothing brand, you know, maybe connecting with them too. That I know they have a lot of followers for their brands, might be a great avenue for like getting the demographic, hitting them from a second site as well. Might be great avenues to reach out. I know they would probably be to work with you as well.
That's a great idea. Thank you. for sure, for sure. Perfect.
Any other comments? I have one question for you, so don't peel off just yet. But any more comments on this, guys? Okay. Zvi, I believe it was called the Recover Norfolk Subcommittee.
Yes.
For the funding for culture, agriculture, whatnot. Where does that stand in the whole cycle of everything?
Yeah, so that is also part of the economic recovery plan. That committee or that subcommittee was brought together on a temporary basis to help create the framework for the grants. So the work of the subcommittee is done. Since then, we have had 2 intakes. So the first intake of the grant program, we had, I want to say 12 or 13 applicants. 8 were ultimately awarded a grant. So those projects are now underway. And then funds were left over. So council agreed to a second intake. That second intake closed in early December. And then just yesterday, actually, we met with the Economic Recovery Task Force to go through the second round of applicants. We received 14 more. And it looks like most of those are going to get recommended. So the next step is to write a staff report to council to request approval of that final batch, and then we'll be done with the funding for the grants. But if all of those get approved, we'll be looking at north of 22, 23 projects that are, active projects, really, really cool projects, everything from, teaching kids, music, pottery lessons, new festivals. It's all over the place. There's great stuff for downtowns. Even from the agriculture perspective, there's an application that's like a soccer tournament for the foreign workers, and just really getting them connected to each other in the community. So really amazing projects, and they've got a year to fulfill those projects, and then we'll report back to council with the outcomes.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's awesome to hear. That's a big feat, and thanks Norfolk for supporting those.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Anything else for Zvi on anything across the board, or Zvi for us, I should say?
I have one more item on the agenda.
Perfect.
So it is. I'm going to bring it up here.
For the farm to table.
As well. Nice. 1 second. I just have to find it. Here it is. Okay, let me share it. So this just came across my desk, and I reached out to planning, and they suggested that I bring this to the Ag Advisory Board. So it is an update from the province regarding AgriSuite and the minimum distance separation tool 1 and 2. So I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with these tools and the AgriSuite tool set. But for those that are familiar with it, the provincial government is shutting down the old tool and has created a new tool that is now online and have updated their minimum distance separation tool set within the online framework of AgriSuite. And this is basically for anyone who's looking for new development to be able to figure out the distance separation to, livestock barns, manure storage, etc. So it's just some information sharing, and I can send it out to the group. And certainly, I'm not sure whether you think that it should also go out to, OFA or the Norfolk Federation, and maybe the fruit growers. Who else should get this information, and whether it's relevant. I asked our planning folks, and they said, yeah, the farming community should know about this. So I guess I'm looking for guidance on where this should go.
Yeah, I think, having Will Stolman on here still, having him online and getting it across those channels. Any other thoughts? Yeah, I think having Will, and then also, we still have Ted on here as well. Having them aware is big, but having them getting this out do we have an email list to send out? That way that we can get this as quickly as possible. Counselor and Trish?
I was just going to say, I would go to all the commodity boards, right? Because they would all have email lists of everyone that's part of their commodities. So you mentioned OF and VGA, but there's several other commodity boards that we could get this info to, and they can send it out whoever's appropriate. Some of them are newsletters, some of them just have emails, whatever works.
Okay.
Counselor?
Dusty, if Will is still on the call here, I would think that the Federation of Agriculture, they should be quite aware of this whole change in the minimum distance separation. And they do have a number of contacts for sure. I see him showed up here on my screen now, so maybe he can comment on where they are at with this whole announcement.
Yeah, we've been working on this, and actually it's been a bigger problem in Brant County at the moment. But yeah, we are trying to get it circulated around to our stakeholders, our members as well, about the expanded or the remodeled version of MDS2. So thanks for sending this out again. Yeah, it is on our desk though. So
Okay. Well, I will share it with the boards and with you folks and everyone else on our list that we have. That's an agriculture list, and hopefully that gets it out there pretty far and wide.
Good deal.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Zvi.
Thanks, everyone.
Kevin, I'll send it to you.
Yes, please. And to receive Zvi's presentation as information, a motion for that as well, please.
Trish and Hayden, thank you kindly. Beautiful. Item 5, deputations. I don't think we have any items there. Perfect.
No deputations today.
Okay. All right. From our last meeting, we are going on to hour 2, everyone. So I appreciate your time here. Item 6, approval of the previous meeting minutes. Anything coming out of our November 24th meeting? It's nice. I'm looking ahead at 7.2, the update from Bill Cridlin that is going to be coming up next. And I know the road, so I'm happy to see that it's on the agenda for an update on that. And I know that was discussed in the minutes, so that's beautiful. Anything else arising from the minutes before I ask for an approval? Seeing none, can I get an approval for the minutes from the 24th? Counselor, perfect. Seconder, Hayden. So moved. Perfect. Item 7, matters to be considered. Election of chair and vice chair, Kevin and or Teresa. I'll step back for this part.
Thank you. Through the chair to committee. For 2022, there is a requirement to have elected or reappoint Dusty as chair. I know he has expressed some sentiments to no longer be chair in the past. So we are just seeking someone to work with the clerk's department team here and chair the meetings, organize the agendas, and a vice chair as well. If there's I'll leave it up to committee to have suggestions on who should be the chair for 2022 and vice chair. Sorry.
Counselor? Sorry, Counselor, you're still muted, sir.
I was just going to share that I think you've done a great job during a difficult past year in chairing this committee for sure, the Ag Advisory Board. And I would ask if you would consider continuing on for another year. I know last year was a very difficult year, and there was times when you had your plate more than full. But if you would kindly accept that to continue on as chair, I think the committee would appreciate it, unless there's someone else puts their hand up and really wants the job. So I would nominate you as chair of the Ag Advisory Board.
Counselor, it's hard to say no to you, I'll tell you that. You've always been a big supporter of me. What I will do, and I know now that it's official, Kevin, before I officially, and if I were to officially accept the nomination, which was not my intention, I will say that. Is there any way for a deferral period? And I know we just keep kicking this metaphorical ball down the hallway before we go and do that, because this year is going to be even crazier for me than last. What is proper procedure in this situation?
Through you, Chairs Mansick, to committee, the proper procedure would be, if you wanted to defer, you may. I would request this be done formally, and that it be the full will of committee to do that, to defer. If so, you can put a motion on the floor for deferral to the next meeting, which will be discussed later. We can finalize those and tweaks that after the meeting when the next one is. But you can put a motion on the floor asking for deferral of the election chair and vice chair to the next meeting. And then if that if that's not the will of the committee, then we will proceed with nominations to the election chair and vice chair for this meeting.
Okay. Because the other thing I want to put out there as well, and now I might be, I'm speaking on behalf of the fact that, you know, the Ag Advisory Board is great, and the other thing that I want to say, especially for those of us that are here every single meeting, it's appreciated. To use the term metaphorical Groundhog Day might be a little, I don't want to use the term sinister, but with that being said, there are groups along in Norfolk County that have strong membership, that have potentially more resources and have voices beyond and with Norfolk County's council and program. Groups like the NFA, and because they're working on similar projects as us, like case in point, Will Stoneman is also, and Ted Smith is also working on the tree lot, the wood lots. So they're aware what's happening in the Norfolk County agriculture as well. This might be, you know, stepping outside of my boundary, but if there's any sort of collaboration that exists more formally with the NFA to broaden our voices that come to these meetings, so that you know, it is not the same 5 group members going to each of our meetings, so we can have a more comprehensive voice, is something that maybe we were to look at in a greater scale, as in a more formal direction, I should say, so that there can be some turnover at chair, and more voices at the table. So I'm just spitballing here for the board and maybe counselor to consider, if that's something that maybe is of interest. If not, then tell me I'm wrong. Anne?
Yeah, just thinking out loud here, could a member, like, I don't know what our terms of reference are, because we have to have so many people per commodity group, right? But could one of those spaces be someone from the Norfolk Federation of Agriculture on this board that wants to be part?
If I may, Chair, to Committee Member Vermeesh, we would have to appoint a committee member that has been as chair, as that's a part of this committee, as appointed by council. We can alternatively, what you could try and do is request the terms of reference be reviewed to maybe foster a little bit more collaboration between the commodity groups and interested stakeholders in the agricultural sector in Norfolk County, to make it a little bit more collaborative. That is a option that you can present to council, and subsequently would be heard at the next council meeting for consideration. If that would be of interest to committee, they could move a motion such as that. But for right now, we cannot necessarily, well, right now we cannot elect a chair that is not a part of the committee. It has to be a committee member for now.
Like, and now, of course, we'd need, you know, I just expressed on behalf of their half. I have no idea if they're interested in doing so, but I'm just spitballing here. I do see Mr. Smith's hand up, though.
Yeah, so from the NFA's perspective, instead of maybe going through the rigmarole of getting somebody onto the Ag Advisory Board, what we had done in the past, at least with Bob Vogelzang, we had a member of council come to our board meetings to advise us on council's perspective on things. They were normally a non-voting member of the board. They just came, presented council, and sat in on meetings and such. Generally speaking, our terms to be seated on the board of the NFA is just that you reside in Norfolk and have an existing OFA membership. So maybe from a point of being collaborative between our two boards, seeing as how we're both political and ag advisor, it might be more pertinent to have somebody from the ag advisory sit in on the Norfolk Federation of Agriculture board, since we're not as regulated as heavily by council, and we're more regulated by OFA and our own constitution.
Through the chair to committee, Ted's recommendation, I would have to review in detail, but I would recommend to look at the terms of reference and see if they need to be amended before we proceed with any action, just so that we're kept in scope with the the current existing terms of reference.
Okay. The other thing is as well, I see as almost like a reminder that the Climate Change Adaptation Committee, how we were, you know, to share what they're talking about here and vice versa. The whole point is trying to move these programs through our tracking table so that we can process things, move on to the next, and not have items, you know, sitting on there from like 2017 or 18, say. Kevin, that's where a lot of the motivation is coming from, so that we can have council, we can have, and what council's thinking is also the heartbeat all the way up through the food chain. I know it causes for more collaboration, as well as information packages we put together, as well as for asking our members of this board to read and become privy on, is as well potential. I don't know if Ted or Will can confirm this, but maybe the collaboration of their meeting minutes or a simple table of what they're discussing, so that the collaboration is in fact, okay, what's going on over there? How can we get Norfolk County's council support, because we do have a councillor sitting in member with us constantly. Maybe that is a start of relationship, that if we can have the minutes and agendas passed forth, or even summaries, so that we can help process things vice versa. is that something that we would look at?
If I may, through the chair to committee, what we can do is we can add those respective commodity group minutes like the NFA and the OFA as communication items to the Ag Board's agenda as well. And then if there's a item of interest that the Ag Board would like to request council consideration on, it can be forwarded to them at the next following council meeting, and that would be an avenue that we could take.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Ryder.
More of a question for Councillor Columbus. A little history on the Ag Advisory Board. What was it before on an Ag Advisory Board? Where did this kind of info get done, and where was it all put together? Was it NFA? And if it was NFA, what made it convert and change over to the Ag Advisory Committee?
No, Jason, it was never an NFA item. Norfolk County's been in the works, as you know, for 21 years. And it was something that just came on with this new council, was to, at one time we had an environmental advisory committee and we had NEAC. And then with all the emphasis with agriculture in Norfolk County, it was put together as having an agricultural advisory board because of all the activity we've got going on in Norfolk agriculture. So there was never a leader of a board like this prior to the Ag Advisory Board.
So the direction come from who then? Just out in the streets on items to talk about, or I'm still confused on what was here before the Ag Advisory Board.
Like I say, there was nothing in effect in any of the former townships and municipalities like Township of Delhi, Town of Norfolk, Township of Norfolk, or Nanacoke or Simcoe.
Okay.
But it was something that was resurrected when the new Norfolk formed.
Okay.
So, Chair, if I may get us back on track, I guess we would go back to whether we are going to do the election of the chair and vice chair at this meeting, or if you would like to put a motion on the floor for deferral to the next one.
Respectively, I would like to put a motion on the floor to defer.
Is there a seconder?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Chair. So to follow procedure, we can't really have the chair put a mover forward. So I saw Committee Member Dooney's hand and Committee Member Ryder's hand.
I
will second the motion.
Okay.
So I guess to call the vote in favor for the deferral to next meeting. All those in favor? Okay, it's carried.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do take your nomination, Councillor Columbus, seriously. I appreciate it. But just have to, my intention was not to, but we'll see how this all shakes out here, and we'll take it from there. Okay, moving on, if we could, to then item 7.2, road entrance permits, Mr. Cridland.
Yes, thank you, Chair Zamenhof. I guess I'm visible and audio here, am I? Always got to double check. Okay, thank you. Always a pleasure to speak in front of this board. I also have invited, took the liberty anyways, invited Devin Hunter, our Director of Roads, who has, before coming to us, had a background in the development and building side of things, so more of an expert on how these play out. So I think we can be fairly brief here. I know at last meeting I sat in, again, it was to speak about the forest bylaw, and the question to come up, I believe, if I understood it correctly, entrance ways and perhaps changes to ag land with the help and the bunkhouses, I'll call them. And I believe this board or group was a little worried that maybe in the future they'd have to expand their bunkhouse footprint on farm properties, and would entrance ways be an issue. So I have, and I do hope, Kevin, that the bylaw itself and the entranceway permit were included in the agenda. So hopefully the board has had time to look it over. I think the only thing I can really add, to be brief, and then maybe I'll see if Devin has anything, is if we do look at the bylaw itself, 2016-32, page 2 or 3, like all bylaws, say the forestry bylaw as well, it does need some updating. Obviously, we've had a reorg, so if I'm looking at under number 2, section 2, section 2.4, I've highlighted, and it needs some wordsmithing. The general manager of Public Works and Environmental Services, or is designated, like that position doesn't exist anymore. We have an operations and a EIS group, so we will have to go through this and change things like that. And I believe the best person there would be the director of roads, Devin himself, as they handle these. So the other part I'd like to point out is I've circled some stuff, and I'm disorganized as usual. There is a clause in here that talks about, and I do apologize. I think it's right. I'm sorry. It's right in the same section of 2.4 where it talks about that, and it says, that they have some decision-making ability, which is in the best interest of the municipality or keeping with good engineering practices. So, in chatting with Devin, I think the ag group, I think you are well covered. I think if you approached us or through the building department, and then they would need an entrance permit, and if there was the ability where one driveway to one bunkhouse wasn't suited, we would allow additional entrance ways, and it would be at Devin's review. So I think we are in good shape. However, I do understand I'm a civil servant here talking to a group that, your livelihood depends on getting this help in and being sure that you do have proper housing for your staff. And again, we would definitely work with you. One question I had is, I'm a little outside of the everyday stuff, the in the weeds things here. I'm not sure if this has been an issue for the group, and if it has, maybe we can talk about a couple of those, or whether this is just kind of some foresight on this group thinking, wow, what's going to happen? And I believe even with the medical officer of health, the section 22s, it used to be 3 folks in a bunkhouse. I'm not sure, that world is changing too. So maybe I'll quit talking here. Devin, anything you want to add? And then maybe we'll open to the group to see if there were some specific stuff that some of my words haven't been true, that we have complicated, and we can work on that. So Devin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Not much from me, Bill. I'm more interested in the concerns and some of the problems this group may have had in the past. And I think you're right. I think we're well covered with the bunkhouse. There is a provision in the bylaw to add additional driveways for garden suites, and I don't think that's a stretch to kind of include bunkhouses in that same parameter. We're willing to work with you guys, so we don't want to create any speed bumps or bottlenecks for you down the road. So we're definitely willing to look at these at one-off scenarios and go above and beyond for you guys.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I see Anne's hand up.
Yeah, my comments aren't really around bunkhouses. It's more around the way I read the bylaw is you're a farm property. So if you have buildings, you're allowed to have one entrance, and then you're allowed to have a second entrance for the field. So I think some of the challenges have arisen before. If you have a big parcel of land per se, like over 100 acres, or it runs from concession to concession, some operators have wanted to put a second entrance in to make, so they don't have to drive around to the other concession just to get onto their own property. And there's, when you go to apply, maybe the bylaw is taken too literally, unless there is an obstruction, I think it reads, then you can't get a second driveway, where it makes sense. And then
sure, I think I can speak to that. Yeah.
The issues for I can't comment to the bunkhouse thing. I'll let someone
No,
else
no,
talk
I
about
think these have been kind of, I think we've created this issue ourselves when this bylaw was revamped back in 2016. And it didn't really spell out an appeal or kind of very much leeway in that, the wording there. And you're right, the only way to get 2 entrances on a field currently based on how that is written is if there's a natural obstruction and you can't actually cross your field. I think what Bill and I have discussed is we're going to lean heavily on that that clause that allows the GM or director to kind of approve things above and beyond. So if you do have that large farm parcel that fronts on multiple roads or concessions, that we would take that into consideration. And if it is safe and it is in the best interest of the county, we will approve those going forward.
Councillor Columbus?
Yes, I think the concern of the Ag Advisory Board for some time now was the fact that they wanted to see something in writing with respect to entrance permits. And I don't know, you're looking at them on a one-on-one basis. So do you think something could be put in writing as to a guideline that would be used for the farming community for entrance permit?
I mean, are you guys looking for like an FAQ kind of document? Because we think that the actual bylaw itself lends us to make those decisions, and we don't necessarily think that we need to modify it too much, aside from updating a few things here and there. Maybe we're oversimplifying it on our end, but we think we can address it as is. Those concerns.
The concern was if you or Bill ever left the employ of the county, hope that don't ever happen. Then whoever comes into your spot, it depends on how they read the bylaw. That was the concern of the board for the last couple of years. So if we put some guidelines together or frequently asked questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, through the chair, to the councillor and board members. Yeah, I mean, maybe we could add within the entrance guidelines, an agricultural specific type of verbiage, because I mean, for a lot of years in Norfolk, not a lot of farmland, changed hands, and then the last 3 decades, you guys know better than me, the smaller farmers going out, they become larger farms. That it's diversification. It's really changed. So I'm not sure what we could put something in there that again we're on the keeping in the best interest of the municipality. Keeping our farmers farming is definitely in the best interest of the municipality. I mean, we could word something as properties change hand or crops rotate. I honestly thought it was totally about the bunkhouses, so I'm glad for the correction there. I was only going on what I'd heard from the last meeting. I think we could probably add a clause in there, and perhaps, I'm not sure of Devin's schedule, Chair Zamanek, do you meet monthly? I'm just thinking if we were on next time, Devin and I could throw together a simple paragraph, 5-6 lines, send it out to you guys ahead of time and say, hey, we feel more comfortable with this, or we don't, and add it. And I think we can just do a cut and paste into this. I don't necessarily know if this has to go to council, but maybe we could just get it to council as well. I just don't want to make it a bigger thing where what about this, what about that? I think we've heard when this first came out in 2016, I was not with the public works side, but anyways, I did hear quite a bit of, it's like any new bylaw, what about, and I think it's settled down. So I think we can add that in, run it by you guys and maybe cut and paste it. And I'll run it by my boss to make sure I'm not overstepping, but I don't want to make this a bigger deal. If 99% of this is good, you just want something, an egg to help you guys, move forward and not worry, then I think we can pull that off.
Yeah, Mr. Krillin, that's beautiful. To Mike's point, and our item after this and other business is actually our 2022 board meeting schedule. So we'll have that date by the end of this meeting, what that next meeting date will be. So it will be in the next month, or like tops 2, because we like to get in at least 3 meetings before harvest starts, before the season starts. So I'm anticipating maybe speaking too quickly out of turn, but by March, I am anticipating that we'll be having our next meeting, if that's enough time for you and Devin.
March, I think, would be perfect. Shouldn't take too long at all.
Okay. Kevin, did I speak out of turn there, or is that what you were looking at for the next meeting?
Yeah, the next meeting I was, my comments were going to be related to the timing during the week when we have them instead of Wednesdays at 9. But the next we can go by monthly, and then if if there aren't any matters to be considered, we can move it to or we can postpone 1 month until there are a more fulsome agenda.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, no, I appreciate that that input and effort, Devin and Bill, because that's yeah, to Councillor's point, getting it in writing in the event of anything happening and for future, that would be beautiful. Because everything's getting bigger, regardless of what it is. So we appreciate having that that amendment. And I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would just echo getting it in writing. Bill and Devin seem logical today, but as a farmer, I've walked into the Delhi office, filled out the form, paid my fee, right? And then you get an email or whatever. Well, it doesn't meet the bylaw. Well, so whoever's reviewing it has taken the bylaw so literally, right? And then you ask, well, what's the process for challenging this, right? And there's not. So it's more around the process. And then it might take a month or more just to get an entrance permit. Because whoever's interpreting it, I don't think the same person's approving it all the time.
Yeah.
Or a staff member's change. Like, that's just me being a practical farmer walking into Delhi applying for it. And then you get denied because it doesn't meet the bylaw. And then you say, well, but it makes practical sense. There's no process around that.
Yeah. Through the chair to Ann, I won't argue with your words. Through the reorg, we've got the Service Norfolk folks who take the initial application, and we've got a couple individuals from 2 different departments. One is for oversized loads and one is for entrance permits. So it is a little spread out, but Devin hopefully has good news on the hiring front here next week that he's been able to hire an admin staff which works below him. It was all part of the plan, just took a little longer to get into place. So in the future, when you go through Service Norfolk, my belief is, okay, we'll take your information. It's going to go on to the roads department. We don't have those folks in between. It goes right to Devon's staff, and I think it'll be quicker and definitely easier. And I see you nodding too, Adam or Devon, because we have heard that before. The Service Norfolk folks are struggling a bit and having to know so much about everything, and at times their interpretation of this I won't say just incorrect. And if we get it back to our own division, you'll be talked to. At least I'm hoping customer service will be better, and you'll get a call saying, "And why it's not." And I think those will be very few and far between, or we have to go up the road another 20 meters to get sight lines or something. So I think that'll will get better as well. It's got to get better.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think there's an issue there too. When you apply for a permit, pay your fee, you expect to get approved, and then you don't get your money back when you don't. So I know it's not the easiest thing, but if you wanted to reach out to myself or the area supervisor for wherever you're applying for that permit in advance of applying for that permit, we can probably discuss in advance and either tell you, sorry, you're out to lunch, you're not getting that permit. Or we can say, yeah, no problem, we'll approve that one. So you're not going into the office, you're not paying your fee and then getting denied and not getting your money back when it's denied. I've got no problem providing that extra step and it shouldn't take that long. It just might give you some peace of mind when you're actually making those applications.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Any more questions from the board at this time? No, this is beautiful, and appreciate the circle back. And yeah, we'll have that meeting date here very soon, guys. And feel free to bounce it off either the board in its entirety, sorry, or Councillor Columbus and I have been working on this for quite some time. So however you want to proceed with bouncing and getting it to the board before the next meeting, please do so. We're at your disposal.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Dusty, if I can take the wheel for one quick sec here. So may I have a motion to receive Bill and Devin's update as information? Committee member Vermeesh, Councillor Columbus. And then we have two communications items. One provided by Michael Simoes regarding the Climate Change Adaptation Committee. He is not attending, it's just to receive as info, as well as what Zvi has already provided comment on for the minimum distance separation from for Agar Suite. So may I have a motion to receive both those items as information? Committee member Fournier, and seconded by Dusty. You're not allowed. Sorry. As chair, that's okay. You know, I'm here to help. So if I could have a seconder for that, that's a committee member, and not the chair. Columbus, and that's carried. Seeing no objections. And then if we can move on to other business now regarding the board meeting schedule. So the concern is with clerk support. This meeting schedule for Wednesday, the third Wednesday, is directly after a council meeting, and staff are working hard to get the minutes out for council meeting and get the action items that are required to the respective departments, as well as there's a scheduling conflict with Police Services Board at the same time on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. So we're a little bit tight pressed to be able to provide fulsome committee support for Wednesdays at 9 a.m. on the third Wednesday of the month. And I'd just like to hear if there's any availability for another time, perhaps the fourth Wednesday instead of the third Wednesday, so that we can give proper dedication to this. I am pinch hitting today because we have had some staff turnaround, and we're looking to recruit a new committee coordinator. That job spec closes today, so we should have someone in new to provide support to the egg board as soon as we're able to hire. So for committee discussion would be if we could potentially move so we'll schedule for every month as it says in the terms of reference. And then if we can always postpone or cancel the meeting if there's not enough agenda items to be discussed, and also delay during the growing community to September or October when things calm down for the community, agricultural community in Norfolk as well. So with that being said, for community discussion would be whether there's a more viable time in the month to set meetings and schedule meetings for this board.
I'm fine with the fourth Wednesday. Most of our meetings have always been in this time slot, and if I could bounce it off of Trish and Hayden and Ann and Counselor, we still like this 9 to 12 slot versus going to an afternoon or an evening meeting. Yeah.
The morning works best for me.
Morning, perfect. I figured as much. That way, good. Yeah, I'm fine with moving it to the fourth Wednesday.
Okay, so may I have a motion to set the next meeting for fourth Wednesday in February is the 23rd. Does that work for everyone? 9 a.m. 23rd? Okay, and Chair Zmancic, you will continue on as chair for that meeting until another one gets elected. So you'll have to deal with us again for another month.
Kevin, honestly, I hope you stay. Even with all this hiring, you've been a treat.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. So we'll set it for Wednesday, February 23rd at 9 a.m. and then each subsequent meeting in 2022 to be on the fourth Wednesday of the month at 9 a.m. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Committee member Dooney, and
Can you just indicate what months we're skipping? Because we were going to skip the ones during busy season, so just so that I can mark that appropriately.
Sure, that would be up to committee's discretion.
Well, guys, what do we think? May, June, July, August, September, October? Because in our terms, we need 4 meetings or 4, correct? Or is it 5 meetings a year, Kevin? I think it's 4.
I'm just looking it up now.
And the tree bylaw, the forestry bylaw, I should say, that goes to council. If I remember, Mr. Biddle, is it in March, Councillor and Kevin?
There will be an update in February, and no council decision will be made, and then I believe that's earmarked for March to have the decision made then.
Okay. Because I'm just kind of slotting in the meetings for updates then. Hayden, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think what I heard Kevin say is we just schedule a meeting for every month, and then it could be confirmed through the chair, whether it's appropriate to have a meeting or not. One thing that we ran into, and I'm being the devil's advocate a little bit here, last year and the previous year is all of a sudden we need a meeting and it's really difficult to organize. Whereas if we have the meeting scheduled and something important or pending comes up, then we can just say, hey, there's this going on, Dusty, here. I think we should keep the meeting even though everybody's really busy, because we need to discuss this fact. And then that way we're not trying to scramble and get people organized there. It's just kind of, it's preempted and scheduled, and then we can, if there's nothing going on and we don't need to talk about anything, we just kind of brush it on until the next meeting. I don't know if that's anybody's.
Yeah, my point, I'm fine with that. Actually, I prefer it. I just don't want to schedule days when we know we're not going to be having a meeting, because I'm booking 2-3 weeks out a lot of times, and I don't always have a time to offer people. So I don't want to have a hole there and find out the week before that it was canceled.
So exactly. So to that note, I like the monthly set-in. When should we, as a board, out of decency, make the call that, yeah, we don't have anything on the agenda? Is 2 weeks notice, so 2 weeks prior, or is that set the prior meeting? So right now we would just decide, do we need a February meeting and leapfrog that way, or when should we have that cutoff line?
For me, at least the prior meeting, because like I said, I'm booking 3-4 weeks out.
Yeah. So,
but I mean, if you tell me we're never going to meet in May, well, then it's not an issue, right? I just won't put it in my calendar.
Right. Yeah. So then let's do that with, if everyone agrees with that, we'll do the sort of meeting prior set. So we'll set in, okay, if we need that meeting, but for the calendar's sake, the 4th Wednesday of every month, until the end of time, or of the calendar year, I should say, we will schedule a meeting and then do appropriately after that. I like that.
For clarity, it would be until the end of term of council. In it's an election year. So.
When's the election?
Late October. I should know this.
Oh, wow.
October 23rd, I think.
Oh wow, exciting year. Okay, cool. Then we will go until October 23rd. Do we need a mover for that, Kevin?
Yes, please. If you don't mind asking for a mover and a seconder to schedule the meetings out for the rest of term of council, and for the next one to be on the 4th Wednesday in February there.
Trish and Hayden.
Okay, sounds good. And then I'll get that down in the minutes, and then adjournment at 11:41 a.m. is the last remaining item on the agenda.
Sorry, and this is more of a follow-up item from my perspective, if I'm able to talk to it. Okay, so one thing I was thinking as we're going through this forestry bylaw stuff, to have an official recommendation from the ag advisory boards, do we need to put motions on the floor? The other option I thought of is maybe what we do is just do a comment summary so that we could send it out to council so that they have that in front of them from the ag advisory board. Is anyone opposed to that? I could work with Anne if we want to go from the comments perspective, put that in front of somebody, and Anne and I could send it to Mike to make sure that it covers off the important notes that we took from today, important points or highlights. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree, Hayden. I think that maybe some of the comments we made here were good, and then we should formalize it in some sort of document.
I too agree that it would be good to have something from the Ag Advisory Board submitted for consideration by council.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Do we need a motion to have Anne and myself work on that and present it on behalf of the Ag Advisory Board?
Wouldn't hurt. Yes, please.
Perfect. If I can get a motion for formal comments be scribed and sent off to council in terms of the incoming forestry bylaw update. A mover and a seconder, please. Anne and Trish. Beautiful. Thank you, Hayden and Trish, and Anne. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Through the committee, if you don't mind sending, once that's drafted up, sending it to clerks at norfolkcounty.ca for submission to the council agenda. And I'll connect with everyone offline to make sure that happens.
Fantastic. Well, thank you kindly, everyone. If there is any communication from Mr. Cridlin and Mr. Hunter that is directly either to myself or Councillor Columbus, we'll send it out, or if they send it to the board or via Kevin, then we'll all see it to whatever that paragraph that they're putting together on our behalf is. Otherwise, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin and Councillor Columbus for being here, and have a great day.
A motion to adjourn at 11:44.
Perfect.
We got committee member Dooney and Councillor Columbus. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good day, everyone. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
All the best, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.